for coming. It is a pleasure to have you all here at the Langham Book Club this evening, and a special welcome to our esteemed guest, Johannes Van Der Bijil. It's a pleasure to have you and speak about your wonderful book. Johannes, could you tell us just a little bit about who you are and what you're doing right now in your life and ministry?
Sure. My wife and I are SAM's USA missionaries. SAM stands for the Society of Anglican Missionaries and Senders. We working as pastors I'm working as a pastor. Louise is kind of helping me in Christchurch, Hilo. Hilo is a small town in North Holland province of the Netherlands. It's outside of the so-called Bible Belt, which is down in the south of the Netherlands.
Mm,
Less than, they say less than 9% of people claim to have any kind of religious affiliation in this area, and I can well attest to that. But yeah, this is where we are right now. I'm also a published author, as you obviously know, and recently a published poet as well. I just had a book published of a collection of my poems on the 150 Psalms, so I'm rather
oh,
excited about it.
fabulous!
Yeah.
Yes, and I've read your poem and one of your poems, and it was fantastic. Now the run of the evening, the first thing that we're going to do is actually have a bit of a directed discussion. So all of those people who are in the participant attendee slot, I'm actually going to ask you a question that will go out to the whole audience, and to answer, just press the little raise hand button, and I can unmute you. Um, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to answer one of my questions and then return with a question of your own to Johannes. Does that sound good to you, Johannes?
Sure.
Fabulous. Well, okay, so my first question of the directed discussion to the attendees here is, what was your favorite part of the experience reading the gospel narrative in this form, and how do you think it was helpful in giving you a better understanding of the scriptures themselves? So, uh, please, if you have those, if you want to answer that question, please use the little raise your hand button. Hello, Cameron.
Hi there.
Tell us, what was your
Um,
experience? What was your favorite part of the experience reading the gospel in this form?
I think probably just the idea of drawing in the emotion of the disciples was great to sort of um, uh, expand the narrative of the Gospels and understand how the disciples might have been reacting to the experience of being with Jesus for those 3 years. So yeah, that was something I really enjoyed and appreciated how it um, rounded out the gospel story.
Fabulous. And do you have a question for
I
Johann
do
about?
actually,
Yeah, go for
Johannes.
it.
So um, well, when I started reading the book, I had always had the impression of Peter as a boots and all type of guy that jumped right into things. You took it a different way where he was a little bit jaded and skeptical at first. What prompted you to take that track with Peter's personality?
Yeah, I think what Peter, I really identify with Peter. I think we have very similar personalities. And just looking at when I was taking the four Gospels and putting them in chronological order, there seems to have been this
This
temptation to follow and then it only comes later where he actually leaves everything and follows Jesus. So there was a period of time when he was kind of hanging around and was witnessing what Jesus was doing and listening to what Jesus was saying, but it's only later where he drops his nets and forsakes his fishing
Mm.
business and follows Jesus. So that's where it really began, where my character analysis of Peter began. There was that
Okay.
period of indecision.
Thank you.
That makes a lot of sense, I think, in terms of, um, you know, I think sometimes we have trouble harmonizing that thought of Peter being called by Andrew to come and see the Messiah, and then being called by Peter, being called by Jesus rather. Um, and when I first read that in the actual Gospels, it was like, is this like, what's going on here? Do these things work together? But it actually demonstrates a period of, um, uh, that there's a period where he actually has to think and make the choice to start following Jesus.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really
Well,
helpful.
it might help if I explain. We this book, the genesis of the writing of this book was really when I was working with J Life Africa, and we were doing disciple training. We were training people how to make disciples, and we were following this fourfold method of disciple making, which is come and see, which is what Andrew does with Peter,
Mm,
and then they do it later with Philip. Philip actually does it with Nathaniel. Come and see, just come and meet him, which is a low level commitment. Just come, like we would invite someone just to come to church, for instance, a very low level commitment. But then there was this second step, which is follow me and observe me, which
mm,
seems to have happened in the life of Peter, where Jesus says, follow me, and he does hang around, but there's no decision yet. That decision comes later when Jesus says, follow me, and I'll make you a fisher of men, and work with me. And then Peter drops everything, and that whole scene of Peter falling on his knees and saying, "Depart from me, Lord." I'm the way I interpret what Peter's saying there is, I'm not what you think I am. I'm not
mm,
disciple making material. I'm just an ordinary man. I'm just a fisherman. I think that's what he was trying to say to Jesus, but he does go and works. Then the fourth stage, which is really not in Breakfast on the Beach, it's in the follow-up book, the For the Life of the World, where Peter actually starts to do what Jesus did with him, he
mm,
does with others. That's the fourth step in disciple making. So that's really the genesis of the book. And as I was wrestling with what happened in that period between Jesus just hanging out with Peter and Peter actually becoming a full-fledged disciple, what happened in that period? And that's where that all comes from. But
mm.
that's a great question, Cameron. Thank you.
That's very helpful.
Thank you.
Uh, Sid, I saw you had your hand up before. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, look, yeah, thank you, Johannes, for the book. I can see you put a lot of effort into writing it. Must have taken you ages. Uh,
A
yeah,
lifetime.
Mm,
yeah, I appreciated the uh, just it kind of read like a little bit like a commentary all the way through on the Gospels, and I got some interesting insights in in the as you describe the places, what the scenery was like, specific places that aren't exactly mentioned in the Gospels themselves, or they're hard to determine when you're just cursory reading. So I do appreciate that. Obviously, when you're writing such a commentary that covers all the Gospels, there's going to be difference of opinion on to some of your readers, because they'll take things a little differently, but that's to be expected with any writing, I guess. Yeah, I found it quite exciting, and it was easy to read, and it
mm.
was well structured. So yeah, thank you. So sorry, I don't really have a question. Just
You
just
don't
to,
have just a comment. Esther and Jirawood, is there anything that you'd like to add to this particular question? Or even Amanda?
Yeah.
Hello.
Oh, sorry.
Hello.
Okay. Sorry.
Sorry,
Jerwood, you
Jirawood.
talk first. You talk first.
Okay. Thank you. Hi, my name is Jirawut. I am from Thailand. Nice to meet you all.
Lovely to meet you too. Well, lovely to see you again, Jirawood. To meet you
I'm
again.
okay. I just finished my work today and I am in the hospital right now.
Oh,
To,
really?
to be honest, I was not sure what to expect when I first read The Breakfast on the Beach. By the way, but it turned out to be a beautiful story.
Mm.
What I loved the most was the atmosphere. The way the setting of the scene was described made me feel like I was there. The way
And
the characters
sorry.
felt real and honest. That's what powerful to me to think about. What if I was in the situation like that? And overall, it's a quiet but moving story that left me feeling calm and reflective. I'm sorry, I don't have any questions right now.
Sure. Well, let me ask you a question. How did you so like we've talked a lot about the different how all the information surrounding the story has really helped. How did you go about drawing that in to both the commentary aspect and the narrative aspect of your work?
You asking me that question?
Yes, I'm asking you that. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that I try to do, and this is important with all my writing, is that when I read a New Testament text, I listen with two ears, my Old Testament ear and my Old World ear.
Hmm.
When we were working with the students in Gambela in Ethiopia, I realized that they did not have the opportunity that many of us in the Western world have to go to a library or to just click on something on the internet to look up things relevant to the text. So that's one of the reasons why I try to explain what they would have seen, what they would have experienced. So we actually did go to Israel. I went to Israel on a study tour. I've done three of these. One was to Israel, one was to Greece, and one was to Turkey, so that I could actually physically touch and see and smell and
Mm.
what they would have seen and touched and smelled. And I asked a lot of questions. I think I was a bit of a pain with the guides because I would ask now, is that flower indigenous to this area? Would it have been there when Jesus was walking there or whatever? And a lot of them were not quite expecting that kind of question. But I think it's important that when I write, I want to, as Gerald was saying, and as Sid was saying, is I really want you to experience as if you were there, as if you were sitting in the circle with the disciples. I want you to smell the wood fire. I go to great lengths right at the end of Breakfast on the Beach to describe the coal fire, because I think
Mm.
there's that experience at the trial and then at the Breakfast on the Beach, and both times that same word is used that is not used anywhere else excepting there in those two instances, and how that would have had an effect on Peter. So Sid was, who was Cameron was talking about the emotion, that we are all emotional beings. So emotion is evoked by what you see and what you taste and what you smell and what you hear. So I'm trying to create that in the books so that even though you may never be, go to Israel or experience these things, you've got a fair picture of what they must have seen. At one point, Peter is taken by surprise with a porcupine. Many people don't
Mm.
realize that there are porcupines, or there were porcupines in Israel. By the way, my editor, the first editor I had a huge problem with these things. She kept on saying, "This is not relevant to the text. This is not relevant to the text." And it's so strange that this is now three times this has been said just in these few minutes of discussion, how important it was to realize this is
Mm.
what, for instance, bougainvilleas in Jericho.
Yeah.
Somebody mentioned to me, I was on my commentary on First and Second Thessalonians, that I described the poppies in Philippi, and they were like,
Mm.
I didn't know there were poppies in Philippi. Yeah, there are poppies in Philippi. Um, so I think these things are important to give you that sense of participation in what you're reading, rather than just a bunch of information. You're actually there. You can see these things. You can smell these things. Anyway, long answer to a very simple question.
Well, there's something about that I think that's really helpful because, for instance, the bougainvilleas here in Brisbane, we've got this sort of public area in the middle of the city with a big sort of archway that goes across the whole walking bush, and it's all covered in bougainvillea. I think there's something about that. It's like being so viscerally being able to see and smell and understand what it's like for something to be covered in bougainvillea, and then
Yeah.
to think, you know, uh, well, I actually share that with the people of the time. These are real people. Um,
Right.
it's very helpful. I have
The
another
other thing,
question, actually.
about
Sorry.
the palms, for instance, when you're dealing with the triumphal entry, palms didn't grow in Jerusalem. They grew in Jericho.
Right.
So these
Yeah.
people must have anticipated the triumphal entry to be able to bring these palm leaves along to use them as Jesus is riding into Jerusalem. And Jericho to Jerusalem is quite a distance. So it is relevant to the text. There
Mm.
are palm leaves, and palms are only found in Jericho. So yeah.
So I have another question. Is there anything specific about ancient Israel, the Israel of the first century, that you think that people miss, but would really help people to understand the text better?
Mm. Yeah, um, I think one thing, I watch these movies about Jesus, and it's
Mm.
never ever watch a movie about Jesus with me, because you'll have a running commentary about that's the wrong color stone used in that building. For instance, they used black basalt. Watch all the movies, and they've got these like light brown limestone bricks. That was much later. Um,
Mhm.
but something like the level of the Sea of Galilee, for instance, the level has dropped since they've been piping water to the Negev, and Bethsaida has popped up from under the water, the
Wow.
real Bethsaida. There was a Bethsaida that they thought, where Peter and Andrew were from, and Philip was from Bethsaida. But yeah, it's things like that. Now, you don't need to go to Israel to understand the biblical text. Don't get me wrong. I don't think that
Mm.
if you never go to Israel, that you'll never be able to understand the gospel. That's not true. Anyone can understand the gospel, even a child can understand the gospel, but this does enhance your experience of the gospel. So knowing where the walls of Jerusalem were, for instance, and where Jesus was crucified. Right now, everything's in the city. It wasn't at that time. Those things are
Mm.
kind of important. Um, yeah, can't really think of anything offhand. Um, Certainly in
That's a
the
helpful answer to that question. Thank you. Mark, you've just joined us. The question we were asking was, what was your favorite part of the experience of reading the gospel in this narrative form? And how do you think that it was helpful in giving you a better understanding of the scriptures themselves? And then if you had a question regarding that. So, um,
I thought we were only starting in 5 minutes. Have you been going for a while already?
We have. I'm sorry. Uh, yes, we started at 7, but we've only gotten through one question so far, so it's okay.
Okay, yeah, because I all your messages said 7:30.
I'm so sorry.
That's fun.
Um,
Johan, how are you? I know Johan from his life in South Africa when he was here, and I've just missed you. Have you gone back home again already?
Yeah, we're back in Hilo.
Well,
Yes.
I'm sorry I missed you, but yeah, lovely to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too. Well, a picture of you.
Yes, I can't see my own screen either. I'm not sure how I get to change that.
um,
Um, uh,
I'm not certain how it works, but I might ask to see if Amanda can.
yeah,
Yeah, Mark, I was just telling them that the book, the genesis of the book was when we were working with J Life in
yeah.
Africa and doing the training, and that's really where Breakfast on the Beach was born.
Oh, lovely.
Conceived, anyway.
Yes. I just want to say, as I said in our last meeting, I've just loved the book. And I think the way that you've conflated all the Gospels in terms of the timeline, which was something you were sharing with us in those days too, it makes it so real. And I've absolutely loved it. I mean, it's been, and it's given me such a new insight, I think, into the Gospels, seeing it through the eyes of one of, and very important apostle. And but I've got only one gripe, which I'll share when there's nobody else, and I won't have to repeat it. Um, and that is just, when you get to that final discussion with Jesus, and he says, "Hey, Peter, do you still?" And I was waiting for, "Do you still love me?" And you
Mm.
switched it to, "Do you still commit yourself to me?" I think something like that.
Are you
And I,
devoted to me?
so that was really a disappointment. But it's the only disappointment in the whole book. The rest is, and I think it's just because I've preached it so often from "Do you love me?" and then contrasting phileo and agape, and then I thought you would unwrap those in a different way. But I mean, I know I can see what you're getting at, but for me, I was a bit sad by that. But that if it's only 2 pages, I'm unhappy with the rest of it is just amazing. And I mean, maybe you could explain why you felt that you needed to change from love to.
Yeah. Tell us your thinking behind that.
Yeah, so the reason why I avoided the word love is because of exactly what you said. There's so many sermons that have been based on phileo agape, and most scholars, linguistic scholars, will say that they don't that they think that's a false distinction. Uh,
Okay.
so that's one of the reasons why I avoided the word love. And the other reason why I chose the word devoted was because that's the essence of what was going on as a disciple. Are you devoted to me? It's not just love that could be interpreted as some sort of a feeling. This is more than a feeling. This is an action. I was looking for a word that would say, yeah, I'm sticking to you. I'm
Yeah.
devoted to you. I'm not going to
Hmm.
deny you again. So that's, yeah, I could have maybe found a better word than devoted, but I was specifically avoiding the word love for
Okay.
that reason.
Okay.
And that's very interesting. You know, in a regular commentary, you'd have a big discussion around the Greek there, but that sort of hits home in a very different way, doesn't it? Um, to
Mm.
to just make that choice and
Right.
have it presented in the narrative that way. Um, uh, so tell me, this one's to the whole group. This is another question to the whole group. How do you feel after reading the book about presenting a commentary in this format in narrative? Do you think it's been useful, and how has it helped you? Go for it, Sid.
Yeah, look, yeah, I think it was helpful. I mean, Peter's such a fascinating character to write about, and I felt I mean, you could have kept going. I thought, oh, you could have kept going, and written about him, in Acts, and and
Well,
I did.
when Paul pulls him up in Galatians, um, so he's such a fascinating character. And then when he writes his epistles, he reflects back on the Mount of Transfiguration, and he's quite a good subject to write about. I thought, and yeah, it's quite thought provoking, and you raised things that are not really apparent when you're just cursory reading it, and so I appreciate your effort. Thank you, Johannes.
So maybe this is an opportunity to tell us more about your second book in the series, the
Yeah.
sequel in a sense.
Yeah, so I agree with you. The gospel kind of just ends in this really high point, with all this expectation of this promise that is to come, and you're kind of just left hanging. And because of that, I did write a sequel, For the Life of the World. I was really going to call that Rock the World. I just loved the play between Peter and Rock, and then Langham just thought, nah, it sounds too much like music, or people are going to get the wrong idea. So they called it For the Life of the World, which I mean, Yaroslav Pelikan and or these other guys wrote books by that title, and I was like, oh, well, anyway, it is what it is. But yeah, so I agree with you. I think Peter, the change in Peter it's interesting to follow up from where he was, and then of course that clash with Paul comes out in my writings of. So I'm busy writing through the letters of Paul, doing Acts, his life, his movement, the places where he moved to, and so on and so on, in the light of his letters. So the letters are written as a discussion group, rather than Paul just sitting down and writing a letter. There's the scribe and all the other people, and the commentary is when they ask him questions like, what do you mean by that? So anyway, that comes up, that clash between Peter and Paul comes up in those books too. But yeah, Peter is fascinating, and he's the what's the word? The most whole of the characters besides Jesus in the gospel. He's the one that you see a lot about him. He's often the one who speaks for the group, or the one who's out there. I think someone mentioned, I think it was Cameron right in the beginning, mentioned that he was this boots and all, putting his foot in it type person. Well, that's why it's quite easy to write about him, because his character is so fleshed out in the Gospels. But to watch the growth, and we all grow, right, in our characters. We aren't just born the way we are. We grow into what we become. And that's what was so fascinating going through the Gospels and following him into Acts, to see how does Peter develop into the great. And of course, Peter disappears in the middle of Acts. He just disappears. But there's a lot of about him going to Cappadocia and Pontus and Bithynia, and actually being in Rome, and all these. So I had to do a lot of extra biblical reading to be able to flesh that out. But yeah. Anyway, I'm
So
going
does
on
the
way too
For the
far.
Life of the World, does that continue to follow Peter
Yes.
all the way through, or does it ever swap to Paul as a
No.
focus?
No, there is a meeting with Paul, but it concentrates more on Peter, and it ends with his death, being
Yeah,
crucified upside down in
fantastic.
Rome. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that was difficult. I see one of the questions you asked me, what was the most difficult in writing the book? And I didn't really have much difficulty with the Gospels, because they are narratives, but the guesswork that I had to do with For the Life of the World, reading Orthodox writings and Roman Catholic writings, and to try and figure out what happened to Peter after he disappeared.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, of course.
that was really difficult.
Cameron, you just have to unmute yourself, but please Please go.
Right, I'm now unmuted. Hi, yeah, Johannes.
Yeah.
Probably the thing that was interesting to me from a commentary point of view was the discussions between the disciples trying to understand Jesus' teaching. And it sort of reminded me often of small groups when we're reading from the Gospels and trying to interpret what Jesus is saying. Um, and I think that, helped understand that, the disciples were just ordinary men that had some biblical training, but they were growing and growing in their understanding of the scriptures as they spent time with Jesus, just as all of us are. So, yeah, I think that was a really worthwhile thing in the narrative for me.
And so, do you have a question or comment regarding a narrative commentary? Is there anything that you'd like to know more about regarding narrative commentary?
Probably not narrative commentary, but one of the things, and I think someone just touched on it before, referring to the Transfiguration, um, that uh, it's always struck me as quite a central role in the overall gospel, and I thought it was interesting, um, your development of their journey to the Transfiguration. It was quite more extensive than you see in the gospel. It's really they went up the hill and then they were there at the Transfiguration. There's not much description about the actual journey up. Um, so I guess my question's more a practical one about what elevation would they have got to, and just some practical things about that trip up to the mountaintop experience as such.
Yeah.
Right. That's really interesting question, and that's why I wrote what I wrote, because I have the same kind of mind. I was thinking now, they must have. So I've been there. I've seen the mountain. It always has snow on the top. That's the source of the Jordan. Um, the snow melts and of course it goes down. And there used to be a lake at the bottom there. They've dried it out, but there used to be a lake, and then it would go down to the upper Jordan and then into the Sea of Galilee and then down the Jordan to the Dead Sea. So it's very much like Kilimanjaro. You do have these different biospheres as you would. So in the beginning, you still have farmlands and so on, but as you go up, the vegetation begins to change and it gets colder. And this is night, of course, because they were sleeping. Um, so yeah, it was that was one of the things the editor was like, what has this got to do with the text? I think yeah, because they do go up on this elevation. You remember in the Old Testament, whenever a prophet would want to meet with God, they would go up some mountain, and so that's kind of normal behavior. So I didn't find that odd. I must just hasten to add that there are different. Traditionally, there's Mount Tabor and there are some other mountains that they think might have been. I just happen to choose, and the name of this mountain is just escaping me right now. But anyway,
Mount Hermon was.
Hermon, yeah, there you go. I just picked that one. That seems to be the consensus. But let me just say something about normal commentaries or scholarly commentaries and narrative commentaries. My target audience are not scholars. If scholars, read them, great. But my target audience were people that were living in impoverished areas that would never have access to all these wonderful books and libraries and never be able to go to Israel. That's my target audience. So when I was writing, I was wanting to include things that you would find in normal scholarly commentaries, but that's in the footnotes. I don't know how many of you read the footnotes, but I'm a big footnote fan. So I often find a lot more in the footnotes than I actually do in the text. But so the narrative commentary is meant to read as a narrative. It's meant to read as a novel, as a story. And so these aspects, these descriptions that there are in the actual narrative commentary are there for the sake of the reader to make it interesting. It's not just basically stating facts. I want them to climb the mountain with him. I want them to feel the air getting colder. I want them to feel the rocky ground and looking for a nice soft patch of grass to lie on. It's all about. I think somebody Jerrowood mentioned that he felt he was there, and that's what I want to create. I'm taking you on a journey with me. Anyway, long answer again.
I certainly think you were successful in that. Jiro, you were next. I saw you put your hand up. Did you have a question?
Okay. I'm very glad that I am one of your target group of this group because I am not a scholar. Okay. I think Breakfast on the Beach is a beautiful example of excellent writing. It is quiet, simple, and short, but it holds so much emotion and meaning that is not easy to do. In my opinion, the narrative style is very effective. Instead of preaching or explaining or other commentaries, because I think it invite us to enter the moment, to feel the silence, the stillness, and the subtle tension between the characters. It reminds me that maybe you don't need a lot of drama or complexity to make something meaningful. Sometimes the simplest moments, like breakfast on the beach or like some activities on the beach, can speak loudest. And
did you have a question? Sorry.
Okay, you go.
Sorry. Did you have a question to follow up with that?
Not for now, but refer to the previous conversation about Israel. Of course, I think going to Israel is not a must to appreciate the stories like this. But for me, I have been to Israel many years ago. It helped bring them to life. When I read the story, I could almost feel the sand under my feet and the silence of the Lake of Galilee, the soft waves, just like I did when I sat by the water there. It made the story feel more personal, more real. Okay, but it is not essential. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Geraldine. I do have a question that sort of came up through that comment. How did you go about fleshing out some of these characters in order to have these subtle tensions between them? I mean, I was thinking to Andrew, he's there's a lot to him in the first opening chapters, whereas it's a bit, in scripture he's sort of this catalyst for Peter, but in terms of his motivations and who he is, how do you draw those out? How did you go about drawing those?
Yeah, I'm a huge Shakespeare fan. I love his plays. I've read them, I've taught them, I've acted in them, And there's always this character that is the foil, and that's what Andrew is. So Andrew helps me bring out, for instance, James and John. They are called the Sons of Thunder, but it's just there, you know. So yeah, they wanted to call down fire, and but I wanted to bring out big. Obviously, for somebody to get a nickname like that, there had to be this habitual behavior, and I needed to flesh that out. So Andrew becomes the target of their arrogance. And if you think about these guys may all be related in some other way. They are also, most of them, other than Peter, only Jesus and Peter are the ones that pay temple tax. So only they are over 20. The rest were all teenagers,
Mm.
which is also something that we just skip over. We don't realize that. So think of yourself when you were a teenager with all those hormones, shooting out all over the place, and you've got these emotions and things going up, and you want to impress if you've ever been a student in a seminary, there's always the student that wants to impress the teacher. And you've got all those dynamics going on amongst these. Plus, you've got one guy who is a collaborator with the Roman Empire, Matthew, and you've got another guy who slits their throats, Simon the Zealot. Can you imagine sitting around a campfire with those two guys, eyeing each other? So I really, I took some liberty with some of the characters, but that was to bring out some of the characteristics I saw in the other characters, like James and John, or like Peter. I needed the foil, and Andrew was just my choice.
Right. Excellent. That's yeah, that's very interesting. Mark, thank you. You've been very patiently sitting there with your hand
Yes,
up.
as I mentioned last time, I actually read the whole book on Audible, and I just wanted to say thank you to Johan for that. Recommend it to anyone, because I think if you're doing this as narrative, to listen to it read to you is a good way to do that. And it's superb. I love your music that you have in between the chapters. And I noticed that, for where Jesus goes to the cross, the music gets a bit more dramatic.
Yeah.
And so that was the one thing. The second is, funny enough, I also wanted to pick up on Andrew, because not only was he a foil, I see you used him to introduce all the scriptures. So, when Simon is kind of wrestling with, the nature of this particular incident or miracle or whatever, and then Andrew comes and says, yeah, that's Psalm 30 or Psalm whatever, and then quotes it. And I found that, I suppose in a commentary you would read that as a note, but it was a good way to introduce those extraneous, just an understanding that this is scripture being fulfilled in a
Right.
real
Right.
sense. Yeah. So then just one question was, I wasn't quite sure why you had to make Simon feel so guilty about not inviting Andrew up Transfiguration, because that's not really a biblical fact, is it?
No, it isn't. Andrew is Simon Peter's brother, and it is the one thing I found surprising was Peter, James, and John, who become the inner group, and Andrew, who actually introduced Peter to Jesus, is left out. So yeah, again, it was my, I was developing characters and so on. So that's why I did that. I have a brother. I have two brothers. I had one's dead, but so I know what it's like to work with siblings and in a sibling rivalry. And I'm still trying to develop the character of Andrew and make him a target with James and John. But let me just say very quickly about Andrew. It was often the case in those kind of families that the older sibling would work, and the younger sibling would be free to go and study the scriptures. So every Jewish boy, and I believe some girls were allowed to study as well, contrary to some of the things I read, but they every Jewish boy would have been able to quote verbatim the first 5 books of Moses by the age of 10.
Sure.
That was part of their, well, that's how they learned Hebrew. So these people would have been speaking Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and Latin. If you were in business, you'd have to converse with the Romans in Latin. So they would have known 4 languages. But the way that they would learn Hebrew from the age of 3, they would go to Hebrew school. And obviously, what would they learn? They would learn the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses. And then they would go on to the Psalms, and then some. And if you had the ability, if you didn't have to work to eat, you could go on and learn the others. And that's what I make Andrew, because I needed someone to be the voice of the commentary. So that's what you have with a narrative commentary, is someone in the story has to be what I would normally put as a comment in a regular commentary. So Andrew becomes my voice. Yeah, making all the comments.
I think this question here is probably a little further afield, but I'm interested anyway if you have any insight into this. I think in Acts, it says that the crowds were astonished that the disciples were unlearned. And one of Bart Ehrman's big quibbles that he talks about a lot is that suggests like the actual literal translation of the word is that they couldn't read or write. But I've always been a bit confused about that, because surely the Hebrew school background would negate that idea
Yeah.
that any of them couldn't read or write.
Well, I think coming from who made the comment, it was made in the Sanhedrin, so they would have considered them unlearned. They were not scholar. In those days, if you followed a rabbi, most of your conversation would be Rabbi Shammai says this, Rabbi Hillel says that, and you'd have these quotations that would be your authority. That's often why they had a problem with Jesus, because he spoke, "I say to you." Said, "You've heard that it was said," which is the normal rabbinical debate, but I say to you. So he exercised a stronger authority, a direct authority, rather than quoting all these rabbis. They assumed that Jesus was unlearned too, because he came from Nazareth. Anything good come from Nazareth? Philip, Nathaniel, that debate. But so, yeah, I would have a problem with saying that they were unschooled. Peter was a fisherman. That would mean he would be in business. So, I mean, if his business is going to thrive, which we assume he did, if you actually see the house of Peter, his house was one of the largest in Capernaum, made out of black basalt. There's now a big old church over it. But if you look at the size of his compound, his compound was one of the largest in that little area that you can see. So he must have had a thriving business. You can't have a thriving business if you are an unschooled person. That just doesn't. It sort of flies in the face of everything we know about Peter. So I've got a beef about this old view of Peter being poor and being stupid. I don't think that either of those fit his character. If you read his letters later on, this is not an unschooled person that writes that way. Of course, he could have had a scribe. That's possible. But everything else seems to indicate that this man knew what he was about. So, yeah, I have a problem with.
And he's quoting scripture from quite early on in the gospel narrative.
Yeah, yeah. I
So
mean, look at his
clearly
sermon, his
knowledgeable.
first sermon in Acts.
Yeah.
He's quoting from Joel. All right, I do make that come from Andrew, but still, the way, if you've ever worked with oral learners, this was my privilege to work with the people in Gambela in Ethiopia. This is right against the South Sudan border. They're oral learners. These people, so I would teach in kind of narrative form. I would tell stories, which was great. The intertestamental period, or I know that somebody has a beef with that term, but anyway, that period between the testaments, that's great for storytelling. I mean, really, Cleopatra and Julius Caesar and Augustus and all these wonderful characters. So I told the story. I told it 3 times, and these guys could give it back to me verbatim.
Mm.
We showed the Jesus movie. I don't know if you know the Jesus movie, but it was translated into Nuer. So we went to this some little village and we showed the movie there. They had seen the movie 3 times before our showing. So they'd seen the movie 3 times. This was their 4th time. And the children were quoting the actors as they were speaking,
Oh,
which
wow.
tells me that these kids had learned the Gospel of Luke word for word.
Mm.
So they memorize things, and the way that they give it back to you, and that's why you have to be so careful you not to mislead them, because they're going to repeat what you've said. If you think back in the time of Peter and Andrew and these guys going to Hebrew school and learning the first 5 books of Moses by heart, that's why they can quote scripture, and they quote perfectly. They don't
Mm.
like my quotation of scripture is, the Johannes Van Der Bijil version.
Yeah.
It's not the NIV or anything, because I can't remember the one word for word, but they wouldn't have been like that. They would have given it back word for word. So yeah, I've got a beef of people that say that they were certainly not scholars on the level of the Sanhedrin.
Right.
They weren't, and I think that's what the comment is. I mean, these are
Is about.
arrogant people making these comments about the disciples. They're looking down at them. It's like, the Oxford people saying that the Cambridge people are stupid. Yeah, that kind of thing.
So this one's to the whole group again. So Johan, at the beginning of the text, you say, and it's something that we talked about in our last meeting, that you want the text to help us in evangelism and ministry to be able to tell the story of the gospel. So this is to the participants, whoever wants to chime in. How do you think that narrative storytelling can be helpful for you in your future of ministry and evangelism now that you've finished the book? Again, just put your hand up on the thing if you'd like to answer. Yes, Mark.
Um, don't you think good preaching does have that narrative element too? Anyway, I mean, I
Mm.
like to kind of dramatize a bit the text that's being used, and I like to use my own story. I know some people don't like preachers to use their own story, but I think I can be more real, when I confess that I drank too much when I was a young person, or, when I gave up the addiction of smoking or whatever. And then to use testimony. I mean, testimony is narrative as well. So, I think that in Jesus, I mean, all his parables were stories. So, I think it's an instinctive and intrinsic part of good scripture communication is to use narrative. So I just think it's great that Johannes now expanded it into the commentary as well. Kind of, it's broadened its appeal, and I'd like to see more of that. I've got your new book, Johannes, and I'm hoping to read that soon. So we can
Fabulous.
expect what, a book on at least each of the 66 in scripture now from you.
Yeah, I'm busy working on First Corinthians.
Oh, that's great. Anyway, I don't know if I've gone off track a bit. I hope that answered what you were.
No,
What
no,
you
that was very helpful. I
asked.
mean, actually, that's a great question. How has the narrative commentary helped you to approach something like the Paul's epistles? Because I imagine that would be quite a different process.
Who are you asking, Mark or me?
That's you,
Okay.
Johan. Sorry.
Um, well, yes, it is. It is a difficult, different process. But when you read the letters, there's a lot that's in those letters that needs to be fleshed out. Otherwise, you're not going to understand. You're going to come out with First Corinthians is a great example because First Corinthians has all these odd commands like women for wearing hats and all that sort of thing, and uh,
Mm.
to abstain from sex or to be single during this difficult time. And what is he talking about? But here, having the Old Testament ear and the New Testament ear, First and Second Thessalonians is great with the Old Testament ear because he's quoting a lot from the Old Testament. That is
Right.
not saying, he doesn't stick his hand up and say, "All right, now I'm going to quote from Daniel." He just does. And
Yeah.
the interesting thing with a lot of these quotations is that they're from the Greek translation, the Septuagint, not
Mm.
from the Masoretic text that we often use. But so uh, the these letters, if you understand them as more like sermons, as Mark was saying, that sermons, the most powerful sermons are the ones that are most real, that you can identify with. So if you read a letter rather in with all the emotion, like Galatians, Paul is shouting. I mean, if it was typed on a computer, it would be all caps in bold. That's his. But First and Second Thessalonians is completely different. He's using familial terms to speak to the same people. So the emotion changes from letter to letter. So the emotion is still there. It's not a narrative like the gospel, which is really easy. I mean, you take a narrative like
Mm.
the gospels or Acts, it's easy to tell a story about something that's written like a story. Not quite the same when you're reading a letter. But if you develop the characters of those who are in the room with Paul as he is writing this letter, and you have them asking the questions, so those people become my Andrew, the Andrew of the Breakfast on the Beach. The others, like Silas and Timothy and these guys, or Barnabas and even John Mark at one stage, become they take on the role that Andrew took on in the role of Breakfast on the Beach. But so understanding the old world, understanding the Old Testament, all these things come into the writing of these books.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Did that answer your
Um,
question?
yeah, it did. Thank you. That was very helpful. And I think in terms of something as tricky as both of the letters to the Corinthians, it's very helpful because sometimes we can get really in the weeds with all those tricky things, and to have it um presented in such an approachable style is really helpful.
Yeah.
Um, Cameron.
Yeah, I'd probably just follow on from Mark's comment about storytelling and using that as a method of evangelism. I think is really important because I'm not a particularly good storyteller, but I think everyone loves a story. Like people love going to the movies, but people love reading a novel. People enjoy a story. So to tell either your own um, testimony or relate the gospel to people in a narrative fashion, I think is more engaging. And when I was listening to Mark, I was just thinking of, and I don't know whether anyone's seen it. What was that movie? The Nativity Story, Simon,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
and
think it's
the
just called the
one of
Nativity
the
Story.
ladies is teaching the children about um, seeing God in the still small voice, and the kids were relating back the story as she told it to them, and yeah, I think that storytelling process is a great way of one, learning, and two, relating the truth of the gospel to people. That's an engaging way of doing it.
Yeah. I think for me in that movie, one of the most like, it's an extra biblical thing that they put in there, but it's so powerful where Mary meets one of the shepherds and he says he's waiting for something important in his life. Like every person has a gift from God and he's waiting for his and he's never seen it before. And then he shows up at the birth of Jesus and he can't even approach, and she tells him that he is for all mankind. And it it gets me every time. Even though it's extra biblical, it's just a beautiful
Right.
piece of storytelling. Jirawid.
As Christians, we are called to share the good news, but that doesn't always mean giving a sermon. Just like me, I'm just an ordinary Christian, but sometimes it means telling a story that reflects grace, restoration, and the presence of God in everyday life. This kind of writing makes spiritual truth more relatable. I think it opens the door for people who might not normally read the Bible or attend church, but perhaps who are searching for meaning, peace, and healing before going to the church in the future. What I love is that the story, the message is not forced. It embodies in the characters. Sometimes the silence, the setting, the situation. And I think that can lead to the deeper conversations about faith, not just with our minds, but reflect from inner heart. In story like this can actually help us to share the gospel, not in a direct or preachy way, but by showing what grace and love look like in real life, like the relation between Andrew and Simon. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jirawid. Amanda.
Yeah, just listening in to everyone speaking, it just feels so I just must say I just really love and feel I've learnt a lot today as well. But I think I'm just getting in response to you, Johan, but also to everyone who's been speaking as well. I think I can also sometimes feel personally like, oh, I'm not too learned or too delving into all the commentaries. Even though I do that in my spare time, there's also others where there's days where I just went, I can't like I can't look through this. And I deal with a lot of youth that have that kind of same mentality as well. And so what I might say might be sound a little heretical, but I like to sometimes read a story and put myself as the main character in it. And you are never ever meant to do that for the Bible. As narcissism, definitely not. But what I think I like about it is the story is that here you're actually going from the eyes of Peter, and actually it's that witnessing and that testimony of seeing Jesus firsthand. And I feel like that doesn't put any burden on me to go, okay, I shouldn't be looking at it as from the side, but I can actually be the main character. I can walk along and see Jesus in that way, and then be that person to witness it to other people. So I guess in that question that you were saying, Simon, it's testimony is so good. And I think Mark was saying that too. Testimony is so good, especially when it comes from a first-hand account. And really, really loving the fact that having to be able to, or having the opportunity to be able to live it, see it, and do it. And even though we can't be there, and we weren't there 2,000 years ago, to have that almost come to life, it's just an amazing experience. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Um, I suppose that will like I'd like to lead that to a question. Uh, Jiraward, did you have another thing to say?
Okay, sometimes people connect more with a story than with a sermon.
Mm,
And if a story makes them feel seen or gives them hope, they can open the door to Jesus.
yeah, fabulous. Thank you. That's a beautiful sentiment. Um, I wanted to ask you, Johan, what have you what have you seen so far in how this book has made an impact um for people? Have people been able to use it in different ministries? You said that the first sort of spark of an idea came from your work in Ethiopia. Um, has it been something effective in different majority world contexts or even beyond that? What have you found so far?
Yeah, I've found that it is the book, the one of the four that have been published that is the best seller, if I can call it that, of the
Yeah.
four. So
Mm,
obviously it resonates with people, but I've heard of book clubs, I've heard of churches using it as Bible studies. Um, and it should be read with an open Bible. I think
yeah.
the first editor I had, that was her problem. What if people start reading this as if they were reading the Bible? And I was like, that's not what it's intended to do. You're supposed to read it like any commentary with an open Bible. So people have used it as Bible studies. Um, I've not really heard anything about people using it as an evangelism tool.
Mm,
Now, I think somebody actually mentioned the fact that you can give this book to people as an act of evangelism. I Here in North Holland, if I have to give someone a Bible, they wouldn't read it. They might throw
mm.
it at me, but they certainly wouldn't read it. But I've given out a number of these books, and people read it because it reads like a novel. There's even
Mm.
a local bookstore, a secular bookstore, that is interested in selling it
Wow.
bookstore. And I was like, wow, this is great. So I found that it really gives me an inroad into my neighbors. I can give them a book and say, here's something you can read. Um, so I've had a lot of that. But to go back to what you were talking about with the disciple making, it is meant as a disciple making tool. So what I was really hoping in the questions that are the characters are raising questions we often ask, or the
Yeah.
world often asks. So I was hoping that somewhere in this narrative, people would begin to see their own questions being answered in this discussion between these characters. But the whole idea that evangelism really starts just by saying, "Come and see."
Mm.
Really, that's the basis of everything. It's relational. All of the characters in this book are relating to each other and to the people outside of them. That's what evangelism is all about, is relationship and relating to each other. So just inviting someone, come to our Bible study, come to our coffee. And it doesn't have to be a Bible study. I think we always
Mm.
think we have to beat people around the ears with Jesus. We don't have to do that. We can really just be their friends. I'm part of a writers group right now. I'm the only Christian,
Mm.
and we're not going to talk about Jesus in these exercises that we do with each other. We're going to talk about writing, but my presence is there, and I think it's very similar to the come and see level of just being there, being a friend, being a listener um, to people that may have questions. The follow and see, that's more like the typical St. Francis thing. I'm preaching Jesus always, although he never said
Mm.
that. But I'm preaching Jesus always. Sometimes I use words. I think that's also important that we live lives in such a way that people look at our relationships with each other. I mean, seriously, if I was a non-Christian looking at the way the church lights into each other and fights with each other and slaughters each other, I really would question whether that would be an organization I want to be a part of.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but if they see a harmonious, loving relationship within the church where we are actually there for each other, helping each other, carrying each other, defending each other, protecting each other, wow, who wouldn't want to be part of that, you know? So that's that follow. And then the one that we often jump to is really the third step. Follow me and work with me. Do what I'm,
Mm.
the teaching bit. There's a lot that goes before that. The
Mm.
relational friendship, the being there, the love, the practical nature of just living day to day, that goes before all this. Let me preach a sermon to you. Let me teach you this Bible study. I think you need to earn the right to speak into the lives of others. So if this book teaches people to do that, then I think I've achieved my goal.
Yeah, fantastic. Um, Mark,
Sorry, you got me again. I already mentioned to Johan. My wife is an English teacher. She was teaching a final year class, and one of her pupils has come to faith. And what sealed the deal for him was he read C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. And she said he's quite a thinking kind of a guy, and that the thinking of C.S. Lewis convinced him. I had to laugh because my father, who also then became a pastor, was converted on reading Mere Christianity. And he wrote a letter to C.S. Lewis to thank him. And he got a reply miraculously on just a sort of an A6 piece of notepaper, which we've framed and hang up as an heirloom on our wall. So anyway, long story short, I asked, I'm getting hold of a copy of Breakfast on the Beach to give to this young man because I think it would be perfect for him, and
Mm.
because it is well thought out. It's not just all emotion. It's carefully thought out, and I think it will appeal to him. But my wife got in before me and has given him a copy of Screw Tape Letters by C.S. which he's loved. So I'll still get the book to him. Johan, they've still got quite a few copies in Cape Town in the bookshop there. So I'll get one and
Yeah.
give it. I
Yeah,
think it's a great way of giving a new angle to a young Christian on the faith. It's a lot less dry than many books are. I think it's yeah. Good. Anyway,
the Screwtape Letters is in some sense like a narrative systematic theology.
yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Um,
Well, of course,
okay.
Screwtape Letters is all narrative as well. I mean, it's
Yes, that's
from a
right.
from a senior devil to a young devil, and I mean, it's very cleverly done. I found it very powerful theater, if you like.
yeah, yeah.
A lot of theological truth. It's great. Yeah.
Fabulous.
You
We're going to
know
move on
what
to
I
a time.
got hold of? Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry.
Is like I've got a version of Screwtape Letters read by John Cleese. Would you believe it?
Oh,
Yeah, I mean it's absolutely brilliant. He does it
Yeah,
brilliantly.
I can
Yeah,
imagine.
yes.
yeah, yeah. Anyway,
I was just going to say we'll move on to a time now just of open discussion and Q&A. So if there are any more questions that anyone has, please feel free to ask them now. And I'll probably start with one. Oh, sorry, Cameron.
Thanks, Smo. Yeah, just a couple of things I wanted to bring up that came up in the discussion. Um, the first one was about that temple tax, which you raised your hand previously, and that all but Peter and Jesus were under 20. I always had the impression of them being young 20-year-olds, but I didn't realize they were like teenagers, basically. Um, and John is always given to be the youngest of the group. So how young would John have been,
Yeah.
do you think?
Yeah, not
Great
very
point.
good with numbers, but if he lived to the reign of Domitian, which we're told he did, as a student, he would have had to have been older than 13. That's when the bar mitzvah takes place at the age
Right.
of 13. Um, and that's when you pass into adulthood. So he would have had to have been older than 13. So 13, 14, 15.
Yep.
And I really do want to say, I think teenagers those days were very different to the teenagers of
Yes.
nowadays.
Yes.
They
True.
were adults. They
Yes.
were
Mm.
already working. They already had, they'd followed in their father's footsteps. If they didn't go to Hebrew school, if they didn't go to, the local yeshiva, they would have been following in the trade of their father. So this would have been a very well-rounded person that you're dealing with, not just a
Yes.
sloppy teenager. But that doesn't take away from the fact that they were still young and they still
Yes.
had reactions as young people.
Yes.
Um, yeah.
The other question, if I may, Simon, is around the unlearned fisherman image
Mm.
that they have, and the fact that the learned people, the Pharisees and Sadducees, um, were learning tradition that was obscuring the scriptures of the Old Testament. Like they were layering this learning on top of the truth of the scripture. And Jesus actually brought the disciples back to the basic truth of the original scripture as it was written in the first place. And I think that's an interesting tension there that while the Pharisees and Sadducees saw themselves as learned, they had moved away from the truth of the scripture.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think you need to understand when you're dealing with the law or tradition, as you called it, is that there was such a thing as the oral law that
Mm.
Mm,
was really a commentary on the scriptures.
yeah.
So in some of these laws, if your wife burnt your toast, you could divorce her.
Mm,
You don't find that in the scriptures, but you do find it in the oral law, the
Yeah.
oral
yeah.
tradition, which later was written. This is now after the destruction of the temple in 70. It was later written in the Mishnah and
Mm,
the Talmud. But these things were floating around there. So when Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said," he's speaking about this oral law.
yes.
But I say to you, and then he goes on to quote the law. So
Yes.
Mm.
I used to find it so confusing with Paul because Paul was like raging against the law, and then he would say, "But the law is holy and just and true." And it's like, what is he getting at here? He's contradicting himself. Well, when you understand that there was this oral law and there was
Yeah.
the biblical law, well, yeah, then it all makes sense.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
And so that oral law that is much more contiguous with the the Orthodox Judaism of today, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, there are rules for the from the very moment you open your eyes. I attended shul for a while, just to
Mm.
see what it was like, and I would wear my little yarmulke. My grandmother from my mother's side, my maternal grandmother was Jewish, so I could kind of get away with it. And I was in the midst of all these guys and the Orthodox guys, and I had my own Siddur, the prayer book. There are prayers for everything. The moment you open your eyes in the morning, and when you put your feet out on the floor, when you brush your teeth, there are all these rules and regulations and prayers and things that govern absolutely everything. How many steps you're allowed to take on the Sabbath, and yeah, it's
Mm,
it's really putting a stumbling block before people, and Jesus was very clear on that. You
mm,
make it so you make it impossible for these people to actually believe. And that was what, if you would, if you could study those things. So if you read books like Yentl, um, about this woman that goes to the yeshiva, disguises herself as a man and goes to the yeshiva, the stuff they had to learn and quote verbatim. So and so says this from the Talmud, and so says that, and the Mishnah says this, and unbelievable. No normal person, I, including myself,
yeah.
would be able to memorize all that stuff and much less live by it. So yeah,
Mm,
huge problem.
mm.
Oral law.
Um, so open questions. Any other questions people have? I just wanted to ask regarding bringing the Gospels together. I mean, there's been many many attempts, and sometimes it can be quite difficult of harmonizing the Gospel accounts. I mean, I think they are in harmony with one another, but you do find these subtle differences between um the synoptic gospels, and then you get John, which is has such a largely, like, feels so largely different. What was your process for yeah, bringing the gospels into harmony to then turn them into narrative?
Yeah, I think most of it isn't that difficult to have
Hmm.
the chronology. So what I did was I had this big mm, what do you call it, timeline on my wall. I had a big
Hmm.
wall that I could stick pins and stuff into it. Um, and I had all the stories of the Gospels. I typed it all up and I cut it into little strips of paper. And I still got a photograph of this. It was just massive. Um, and just putting it along the timeline and seeing what happened when.
Hmm.
And then the overlapping ones, those were obviously the easiest.
Yeah.
When, for instance, the cleansing of the temple in John comes at the beginning of John, the cleansing of the temple in the others is at the end of Jesus' ministry. I Some people say, oh well, John just put it there for theological reasons. I put two in there, and I think
Mm.
it's a good sandwiching because Jesus is cleansing the temple. It sandwiches his ministry. He does it at the beginning of his ministry, he does it at the end of his ministry. I think that would be a quite an acceptable thing. So I had to make a choice there.
Yeah.
And I chose to include both. And there were certain things I had to make. And I didn't do it on my own. I mean, there are chronologies that have been written.
Mm.
Um, John is one where you really, really need to know your Old Testament well if you're going to understand the Gospel of John.
Yeah.
Um, because he's John, of all the people, he's the one that gains access into the trial of Jesus, and it says he was known to the high priest. There, there's this is speculation on my part, and but many scholars agree that there must have been some connection between James and John, and the Jewish Sanhedrin for him to be able to gain access at such a volatile time, and get Peter in there. Um, so if you go, and this is where it's helpful to look at the family structures. Jesus' mother, obviously a descendant of David, but she goes to her aunt, when she knows she's pregnant with Jesus, who is a direct descendant of Aaron. So you have both the priestly family and the kingly family in Mary.
Mm.
And obviously with Joseph, you have the Davidic line. Not so sure about the Aaronic line, but definitely in Mary, you have both lines converging. So there's a connection between this family and the Jewish rulers in Jerusalem. And John, of course, he describes things the temple and the law, and so he's far more priestly than the other three. And of course, Luke is not writing as an eyewitness; he's writing as a compiler or an editor
Mm.
or a historian, if you will. The other two were definitely eyewitnesses. Mark probably later, because it's John Mark's home that becomes the scene for the Lord's Supper and then later for Pentecost. Um, he's probably the guy that ran Starkers, in the garden. John Mark.
Yeah,
So when you start putting these things together, it really just, I think, enhances the message of the gospel.
fantastic. Um, so I'll open up just for any last comments or questions, but then if there aren't any, I'll throw it back to you, Johan. If there's anything else that you want to say, yeah, any loose ends you'd like to say before we finish, anything you'd love to leave us with, we'd appreciate. One last piece of your wisdom.
Do you want to see if there's some questions first before I
Um,
say
yes,
anything?
so I'll just open up for any more questions if you want to put your hand up for if you have anything else that you'd like to throw out there.
Well, while everybody's thinking, let me say this. You did ask the question about is there something in Israel that people need to see in order to
Mm.
understand a little bit better. Um, not This is not related to Breakfast on the Beach, but we were in Perga the other day, and in Revelation, right at the end, where you have this great scene of heaven with the throne of God and the water flowing out from under the throne of God into this river that's in the middle of the street, and either side there the tree of life is there.
Mm.
But in Perga, there's always these main streets, north to south and east to west, and then you have all the other little streets going off. Most of the cities were built on this grid pattern. But in their main street, and I can't remember if it's north to south or east to west, but the main street, right at the end of the street, as you enter, there's this huge nymphaeum, this huge fountain with the gods and so on. But there's one particular god, and I can't remember which god it was, seated on a throne with water gushing out from under the throne down
Mm.
the middle of the street in a man-made, it's a canal, but let's say a man-made river down the middle of the street. And either side of this, there were these pillars, they were covered stowers where people would walk in the shade. And it absolutely blew my mind. I was
Yeah.
looking at this and thinking that's exactly what John was describing when he was trying to tell us about what heaven looks like. Um, so it's things like that I have just found, and of course this is going to come out in my writing when I'm writing these things. I can visit these things, but how many people get the opportunity to go to these ancient sites? And this was a study tour, a 3 week intensive study tour that scholars do, and there was this professor that was leading. And this guy is a walking encyclopedia. He just never stops. He's like, wow, wow,
Mm.
wow, all the way through the day, walking through these ancient cities, seeing these things that Paul would have seen. We know he was in Perga. Um, if John was there, who knows? I mean, John was in the area, right? He was in Ephesus, and that's very close, before he was sent off to Patmos. So I think there's value in describing these these what it would have looked like when they were there.
Mm.
But not only describing these things. For instance, with First Corinthians, there's this new field of study called epigraphy, where they look at the inscriptions on tombs and on monuments, and they discovered that Corinth was in the grip of a famine from about before Paul got there, when Paul was there, and then all the way through into 58, 59, 60, when he wrote the first letter to Corinth. And it is highly possible that the fact that food was in short supply, that he says a lot of the things that he does in the letter. That's one of the reasons why I think he says, don't have sexual intercourse with a woman, or don't touch a woman.
Mm.
You don't want another hungry mouth to feed,
Mm.
because of what, and he says there, the present distress. I think, and most modern scholars now, after they've discovered all these monuments about this guy that was the grain supplier, um, indicating that there was a famine, it makes so much sense. And it
Mm.
also makes sense why there were people starving at the Lord's Supper while others were feasting.
Yes.
Because
Okay.
the day
Wow.
laborers, if there was a food shortage, the day laborers wouldn't have money to purchase food. And in the church, that was just simply unacceptable. You would have to. So that's what I'm trying to do with my writing. I'm trying to bring all these things in so that when you read it, um, you won't have to read. I've had to read so many scholarly articles about this one little thing, this famine that took place in that area, um, just to be able to write a few paragraphs,
Yeah.
or at least to substantiate why I'm saying what I'm saying. That's the same with Breakfast on the Beach. I think if ever I get the chance, I'd like to rewrite Breakfast on the Beach.
Hmm.
Fill it, the first editor cut out a lot of stuff that I think needs to go back into it, but I would actually expand it even more,
Sure.
because I've learned more since then, about the area and about how that would have affected Jesus and the disciples. And um, yeah. So I'm an inquisitive person. I love learning about different cultures, and even if they are ancient cultures, you can read about these ancient cultures in the letters that were written by normal people at the time. Some of the letters are still available, and you can see how they were thinking. Like another one is the hot and cold thing in Laodicea.
Mm.
If you go to any Greek city, you'll always find a gym where all the guys would run around naked and do their gymnastic thing. But then they would go to the hot room, or the hot water room, where heated water was in a pool. It was like a sauna type thing. And then they would go to the frigidarium, which is the cold water pool. And both were good. Hot was good and cold was good. But this tepidarium, this in between thing, lukewarm, was not good. And there's a letter
Mm.
of a slave owner writing to another friend, complaining about a slave who would always give his food was never hot, and his drinks were never cold. And I'm like, man, that makes so much sense.
Yes.
Um,
This why he says spitting out of the mouth rather
Yeah,
than
and the vomitarium, the
yeah.
vomit. He actually says, "I'm going to vomit you out of the mouth." The vomitarium, or vomitarium, however you pronounce it, that was the exit from a stage in the theater.
Mm.
Was called a vomitarium. So he's saying, "I'm going to just take you off the stage."
Yeah. Wow.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like it just makes, and I love it. It just makes all these little images, and I can
Mm.
actually see a stage hand being plucked from the side and get off the stage. You're not doing a good job out there.
Yeah.
Using a shepherd's crook.
Well, I mean, it looks like we don't have any more questions. I think you've given us so much wisdom to chew on that we might We might need a few days, just some downtime to think. But it's been such a pleasure. Um, was there anything else that you'd like to add toward the end
Don't get me started. You're never going to go to bed.
here? Yes, that's true.
And
Well,
I can get
perhaps
really
we can
super
have you back
excited.
again, since I would very much love to engage with your next book. So yeah, we'll see. This is such a pleasure. Thank you very much, Johan.
Well, thank
Um,
you. And thank you to everyone for all the wonderful things that they were saying and the questions. That was great.
yes. Amanda's saying, should we all be panelists so we can see everyone's faces? Yeah. I mean, if everyone would like to just say goodbye.